Welcome everyone to DOP 213S, Journey from Telemetry to Business Metrics. This is a sponsored session, but you won't be hearing much about Datadog for the entire time. Instead, we want to focus on an important concept that you should understand. Now, I hate presentations that start with a long description of the speakers. I want to get straight into the meat right away, and then you can tell me who you are. I guess I want to know what I'm getting before I invest the time. So we'll start with some definitions, and then we'll tell you a little bit about who you are and move forward with the presentation. So what are you going to get out of this session? Well, we want to cover business metrics versus performance metrics. We want to cover the benefits of monitoring early, and we want to cover some examples of some core business metrics. So let's start talking about a core metric each of our companies use. We want to talk about the metric metadata. For obvious reasons, we can't really tell you the actual current value of the metrics or a chart showing its trajectory, but sharing what we look at is interesting nonetheless. So Datadog, we're a software as a service business. We rely on new users to find our site and then sign up for a trial. Hopefully, if we do everything right, that trial turns into a full subscription. Early on, we just kept an eye on how many were using our platform. That shows the current usage, but doesn't really tell us anything about future usage. So we then started watching the signups per day. Now, this shows us how effective our sales and marketing efforts are. And because it's a finite period of time, a day, we can measure how we're improving over time and what activities really resonate with future customers. Shivansh, can you tell us about one of your core business metrics?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. So AWS Quick Start is a partner program where we publish deployment accelerators that help customers deploy partner products quickly and rapidly on AWS with a single click. We have hundreds of quick starts in our catalog, which our customers can use for their specific use cases. So we want to make sure that we have the right set of solutions and integrations that customers are looking for, and it is meeting their needs. Therefore, we established number of quick starts published as one of the metric we look into and monitor. But we don't just look at that raw number as is. We correlate that with many other metrics we use. So, do we have a quick start that covers various use cases a customer need? For example, networking or a specific industry-specific quick start. Are there any use cases for which customers are looking for a solution that we do not have a quick start in our catalog? These are some of the questions that we constantly try to answer for ourselves, and these metrics help us do that. Obviously, these are not all the solutions available on AWS. There are other places like AWS Solution Page and AWS Samples repo where there are many other solutions available for customers to get started. But this particular metric gives us a good understanding of what customers are looking for. So now, before we go further, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Shivansh Singh. I'm a senior partner solution architect at AWS Integration and Automation team. I work with AWS partners, both integrated solution vendors and consulting partners, to build and publish deployment accelerators and integrations that help customers like you to deploy these partner products quickly and rapidly on AWS. Matt?
Yeah, so I'm Matt Williams. I'm an evangelist at Datadog. Datadog is a software as a service monitoring and analytics firm. And I've been here for about 7 years, an amazing company, super excited to be here, and super excited to be speaking at reInvent. So let's start off this session with a couple of definitions. the first one that we want to cover, obviously this talk is about business metrics. Let's start off with, what is a business metric? Well, business metric applies raw performance metrics to business goals. And they're based on a number of things. Well, it could be based on one thing or a number of things. And those things come from metrics, they come from traces, they come from logs, and they come from events. The four major types of telemetry or performance metrics. And they're often based on a collection of raw sources. Now, you should make sure that a business metric is understandable by a non-DevOps audience. Now, what that means is, if I talk about requests per second on my Nginx server or my Apache server, maybe somebody in sales or marketing is kind of going to understand what that means, but they don't really understand the context or how it relates to metrics that they would understand or that they would care about. And so you really want to have business metrics that are understandable by whichever audience this particular business metric targets. And sometimes they're actually referred to as KPIs. So now on to telemetry or performance metrics. I already listed them: metrics, traces, APM, metrics, traces, logs, and events. So those are the four types of source material that we can use in our business metrics. For metrics, we're talking about infrastructure metrics. We're talking about how many requests per second on my Nginx server. We're talking about how many rows added to a SQL database. For traces, it's all about application performance monitoring. So I instrument a little bit of my code, and a little bit of my code at each function. A request comes in from the end user, and it goes to this function, to this function, to this function, to this function, and then back. Seeing that entire path is referred to as a trace. Then there, of course, are logs. Logs are all the logs that are generated by your application. If you have a function, maybe you write out to the logs that this particular thing happened, this particular data point was captured about a user or about a piece of data. And then, of course, there are the events. Events might be my Docker container or my Kubernetes container or pod spun up or was destroyed. So all those things, the metrics, traces, logs, and events, all count as telemetry or performance metrics. Shivansh?
Yeah, so let's look into how a typical software development lifecycle looks like and where is that monitoring we are talking about. So here is a typical representation of software development lifecycle. Of course, your implementation would be a little bit different, but this is how it generally looks like in large enterprises or large organizations. At the beginning, you might have a requirement analysis. You are basically trying to understand what is the current problem you are trying to solve. You hear from all your customers, your experts, development teams, and everyone else to really focus and understand and analyze the problem you want to solve. Understand the current solution to learn from that and then work on what exactly you are trying to solve. Next phase is the planning phase. In this phase, whatever you have done as part of the analysis feeds into the planning phase to basically define what you are going to be solving and what is that solution going to be. You are also going to be looking into, in this particular phase, are the costs worth it and what are some of the things you are going to take risk on. And from there, once you have completed your planning phase, you move on to the design phase. This phase is where you start to figure out how to achieve the plan you have put together in the previous step and make it a reality. You start to go to the stakeholders and get their reviews and feedback on your planning as well as the design you are putting together to solve that problem which you started with. Then actually you want to the implementation phase. This is the phase where you actually put hands on the keyboard and you start implementing the solution. We all need to stick to the design that we all agreed on in this phase so that we can actually make sure that we are solving the problem we started with. And then comes the testing. In this phase, you're basically trying to answer the question, did we stick to the design we put together? Is our implementation bug-free? What are some of the things which might have been deviated, and how do you going to fix that maybe in the next iteration? And basically answer some of those questions and make sure that you are doing the implementation correctly based on the well-defined design. And finally, there is a deployment and the maintenance phase. In this particular phase, you are essentially running the application, maintaining the application, and trying to collect the details of the running application and making sure that it's working perfectly fine.
So that is the software development lifecycle, those 6 steps. Sometimes you'll see it as 5 steps or 7 steps, but it's roughly those 6 steps. That may not be how you actually develop, when you build your personal projects, but in an enterprise situation, we're looking at usually something like those 6 steps. But if we look at those, and the names are going to be different every time you see it described online, but none of the names say monitoring. So where does monitoring fit in? In each of those 6 steps, I just didn't say anything that said monitoring, but that's okay. I don't think monitoring should be any step in the middle or part of any one step. It really needs to be part of all the steps, but all too often it shows up as an afterthought or shows up in maintenance, the very last stage. Monitoring should start early, all the way at the beginning when planning or even earlier. It should be part of the analysis. How is the current solution monitored? It should be part of planning. What metrics do we want to watch? How do we measure success? How will we know if we're on the right track? It should be part of design. How will we achieve these metrics? What performance metrics will be watched to come up with the right business metrics? It should be part of implementation. As we build the product, we should ensure that performance is improving. We should see that those goals are possible. It should be part of testing. Now that we built it, are we watching the right performance metrics to come up with the business metrics? And of course, it should be part of maintenance because we need to monitor as we go along and ensure that performance stays as well as it should be. When it's part of all the stages, we can ensure that the business metrics are right for the organization and for the project. And even after thinking about it in every step, you won't think of everything, and that's okay. So let's move on to the next slide. So what are the key business metrics that you should be thinking of? Well, I'd love to give you a simple list. Do this, 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 and this, and that's it. But I can't do that because it really depends. Monitoring is important no matter what your role is, ops, dev, marketing, project management, sales, exec. If you're in finance, maybe the metrics are around profitability. Is the income from this product more than the cost of running the resources? And there are similar metrics for, if you're in a finance organization or a sales org, or maybe in your marketing or dev or exec. All these have different metrics that they might really care about. And so if we look at this list of useful business metrics, you might see some here that are interesting. In fact, if you look online for common KPIs or business metrics, you're going to find large lists of similar metrics for different orgs. One of the ones that resonates with me is that new customers, which is kind of like that signups per day that I talked about at the beginning. The number of new customers shows us, how many of the customers that we have today are new, and that shows us the cadence through the product, and that's a really interesting thing to watch. And of course, it should be new customers per day, per month, per quarter. But seeing how many new customers are coming on board each of those intervals and how it compares to the previous interval is super interesting. Shivansh, do you have any favorite metrics?
Yeah, so for example, like as you touched upon, Matt, earlier, that for different organizations, different department, there's going to be different business metrics. For example, one of the thing I can think of is if you are a development team and you have the business metrics, something defined as probably deployment frequency, you want to make sure that you want to actually monitor the deployment frequency of your assets your team is producing so that you can actually measure how quickly the commits which are being made by the developers into the source control is actually going into the production. That tells you that how frequently your business is actually providing features to the customers. Similarly, the other could be the team velocity, which is a metric which a lot of teams, the development teams, should be monitoring. And that tells them that how productive or how much as assets the team is being developing and producing, and how what is the speed at which those features are going to the customers. So here are some of the questions which can help you come up with the really good and the right business metrics for you, which we are going to talk about. So the first one is, what's the goal of the company?
Yeah, so this is, one of the first questions that you want to ask yourself or ask your team. And hopefully this is the easiest question because hopefully somebody in your organization has already figured this stuff out. You should already know what is the goal of the company. And it doesn't have to be, and when I say company, I really should say department, division, organization, whatever is the right size of the group that we're talking about. I'll just say company for now. But it doesn't have to be one goal. It could be 5 goals. It could be 10 goals, 15 goals, whatever it is. And as long as it's not hundreds of goals, dealing with hundreds of goals, that's pretty hard. So one of the next questions is going to be, how can you increase the potential to reach that top level goal? Shivansh?
So basically, in this particular question, you're saying, what are some of the things that you and your group or your project can do actually to make a dent to that top level goal, which has been defined at the organization or a company level? And you may not check all the check boxes of that top level goal, but you can think of sub goals and divide that top level goal into sub goal and align those sub goals to your own department or on your own division, and then align it to make sure that you are making a dent to that sub goals, which will ultimately make a bigger impact to the organization.
And then related, or another question to ask is going to be, who owns that metric? Shivansh?
Yeah, so that's basically really understanding who owns the metrics, and that helps to understand why that metric is important. What are some of the metrics that are most important to that particular division or a department? It basically helps you get answered by this particular question. If a metric is owned by executives or finance or marketing or development team or someone else, that metric will depend on who is owning that metric. And then knowing that will help you translate that business metric, which makes most sense to that audience. So the next question is, what are the best raw sources for this data?
Yeah, so this is a great question for you to ask. Is there's not any one right answer to this. It depends on what is the business metric that you're trying to come up with, and what is the business goal that you're trying to match that up with. And the best raw sources, it could be one thing, it could be a dozen things. And it's up to you to know all the performance metrics that are available. And you might not know everything today. You know a lot and can kind of figure out what are the best, if this is all about, is the customer receiving the right information, or that's not really a great one, but customers are receiving the right information every day or every quarter. Well, how do we discover that? Are we going to pull out some traces? Are we going to pull out some logs? Are we going to pull out some metrics? And which are the right metrics? Maybe there's something about different databases, and also pulling out the data from the database or pulling out the metrics from the database, but also looking at that button at the end saying where the customer is asked, did they get the right information? Did they get the information they requested? And so those two bits of information, and maybe others, make up the best raw sources for this particular business metric. So asking what are the best sources, that's another one of those challenging questions you need to answer.
And what time frame makes the most sense?
Yeah, so an appropriate time frame makes a simple number much easier to compare. When talking about, let's go back to my performance metric that I mentioned before, requests handled. Well, actually, let's talk, rather than requests per second in Nginx or Apache, let's just talk about request handled for some other business process. Just seeing a number doesn't really tell us much. 57, 62. I don't know what's going on there. But pairing that to a time period starts to create a story, a comparable story. It could be requests per week or per month or per hour or per second. I don't have a right answer, but it should be a time frame that makes sense for your business or for the metric. And when I know it's per week, I can compare last week to the week before or a year before. So coming up with the right time frame is pretty important.
And what granularity makes the most sense?
Yeah, so granularity is all about what level of detail you care about. If you have a metric about, let's say, building a server, is the right granularity, do you need to just think about building the server, or do you need to actually have a metric about the time required to configure everything, or the time to get the ISO and install it? Or does that actually include the time to learn about installing? How deep do you want to go in that, in detail? And that is how much granularity makes the most sense for this particular metric.
Are there additional raw sources that add more value?
And so this is one of those open-ended questions that you can keep massage as you go along. As you learn more about the raw sources collected, you'll discover things that will help you come up with a more refined business metric. And you may even learn that some of the raw sources that you used before weren't specific enough, or maybe too specific, and another source would be better. So here we have the complete list of those 7 questions. What's the goal of the company? How do we increase potential? Who owns the metric? What are the best sources, raw sources? What time frame makes the most sense? Granularity and additional raw sources. And so here we have them all on the same page, because if you're anything like me, you probably forgot what the first one was already.
Yeah, so those now at this point, by asking those 7 questions, hopefully you have identified few business metrics. It could be 3, it could be 5, it could be 15 or 20. Now, once you have those, it's important to ask, whatever the metrics you have came up with, are those any good? Why those business metrics are important? And the next 5 questions, which we are going to talk about, will essentially help you identify just that.
Yeah, so the first of these 5 additional questions is, can it be easily quantified? Shivansh?
Yeah, so many of these questions are kind of like similar in a pattern, but what you really need to answer is, can you actually quantify these metrics? And this goes back to similar to like a personal goals or OKRs, right? are those metrics specific? Um, are they really simple, simplified? And are those measurables? Is there a meaning to that metric? Is it really you can something measure in numbers? Are those metrics achievable? Is it something which everybody, all the stakeholders have agreed upon? And as a team, can you attain those metrics? Relevancy is also important for the business metrics you just have identified. Are those reasonable? Is it realistic? You don't want to have a metric, business metric, which you cannot, which is not relevant for your particular group or your particular division. And last but not the least is the time bound. You really need to time box these metric and basically say, are these metrics time based and time sensitive within a specific time period? Like, can you achieve those metrics and the goals within that specific time frame?
And then another great question to ask to confirm is this a leading or lagging indicator of performance?
Yeah, and this is an interesting one to ask as it helps you identify if a business metric you have identified will help you assess the current state of your business or your project, or is it an indicator of the future conditions? So the leading indicators are sometimes usually described as input metrics. They define what actions are necessary to achieve your goals with measurable outcomes. Um, they usually lead to successfully meeting the overall business objectives or a project objective or your team objectives, which is why they are called leading. Example of some of these are like percentage of customers that sign up for, let's say, annual subscription, right? Number of license renewals for the particular product you are selling, or number of customers that actually have purchased software add-ons. Those are all telling you and leading towards the current performance of your project or your business. Whereas the lagging indicator is the opposite of leading. It's a measure to, it's basically to measure the current production and performance. Lagging indicator is sometimes compared to an output metric, which is, of course, as I mentioned, opposite to the leading, which is input metric. And some of the examples are like profits and expenses and revenue. Those are the output of your business or of your project or your particular division and department. Now, the another question to ask is it easy to understand?
Yeah, so this is, it depends. I mean, this is one of those questions you need to ask to confirm that, just to make sure that you know. Is it easy to understand for whatever the target audience of this metric is? If I have a performance metric, as I mentioned before, the request per second in Nginx, a salesperson is going to maybe understand what that specific thing means, but not how it relates to the overall business goals. So these business metrics should be understandable, at least to that audience. So if it's a business metric that's more towards sales, then everybody in the sales organization should have the base knowledge to be able to understand that. And if some people can't understand it, maybe it's the wrong business metric. Maybe you need to refine it a bit to come up with the right kind of business metric.
Yeah, and the other question to ask is, does it link to the overall business goals?
Yeah, so one of the I guess pitfalls that you can fall into with coming up with business metrics is that you've got this massive collection of performance metrics. We see customers that easily have 50,000, 100,000 performance metrics that are coming in every 10 to 15 seconds. That's a lot of stuff. And you might think, oh, I gotta use that somewhere. Oh, that's super juicy. Let's grab this as well and come up with some business metrics that, leverage all this stuff. When in fact, you should be starting from the other side. Should be starting with what are the business goals? Once you understand your business goals, come up with the right business metrics that support those goals. And then once you have that in mind, come up with the right performance metrics to fit that business metric. And if you go that way, you know it's going to link to the overall business goal. If it doesn't quite link up, or if you didn't go that route, it's possible for them to link up. So you might want to rethink that. And then the last of these 5 is it the right interval or granularity to be useful? Shivansh?
Yeah, so identifying the right interval and granularity of the business metric is as important as measuring the business metric itself, if not more. Not having a metric measured over a long interval means you essentially do not have the ability to identify and look for patterns, right? That's one of the things which you can actually do if you are measuring those metrics in a log interval of time. Similarly, not having the ability to drill down into those business metrics in a given interval of a small duration means you do not have enough granularity in your business metric, which means you will miss some of the trouble indicators that is visible only if you deep dive into that small portion of that metric. So it's really important that you define what is the right interval and the granularity to really see the patterns and also dive deep into if you need to.
Great. So those were the 5 questions that you want to ask just to confirm that you're on the right track with your business metrics. And again, since if you're like me, you probably already forgot what the first one was. Let's put them all on the same screen and we can see it all in one place. Can it be easily quantified? Is it a leading or lagging indicator? That one doesn't say it's right or wrong. It's just something to know about. Is it a leading or lagging indicator? Is it easy to understand? Does it link to the overall business goals? And is it the right interval and granularity to be useful? Then, of course, comes the challenge. So how do you deliver these business metrics? And I'd like to say the obvious answer is to use a tool like Datadog to show some dashboards. Don't just create dashboards with a whole bunch of random stuff. Try to make the dashboards consistent. They show one major concept or one major area of the business. Show all the business metrics that are relevant to each other on that one dashboard. And we often at Datadog have big screens, big TV screens or monitors set up in very prominent places, showing us those core business metrics. How are we doing as a business, and how are we serving our customers? So dashboards is the most obvious answer. There's lots of other ways you could deliver these business metrics, but I think dashboards is probably the primary one. And so that's we just want to end with a few resources, some great reading that we have up on our blog at datadoghq.com. There's a few articles here you might find interesting. One is with Peloton Cycle. Hopefully you probably know about Peloton Cycle. I've got one that's perhaps a little bit underused upstairs in my bedroom. But Peloton's a great customer who has integrated their IT and business level custom metrics into amazing dashboards. And so this article talks a little bit about that. So it's dtdg.co/pltn for Peloton. Then there's real-time business intelligence. So that's more of an article that also is on our website, dtdg.co/rtbi for real-time business intelligence. And then I also pointed to a series of blog posts about service level objectives. Not quite the same thing as business metrics, but it's a nice read for how to how to gather lots of different metrics to come up with one good, in this case, SLO. And so you can reach that at dtdg.co/SLO21. And that brings us to the end of this session. I hope that you got a lot out of this session. It was a lot of fun for me and Shivansh to put together for all of you. My name is Matt Williams, and you can reach me at matt.williams@datadoghq.com or on Twitter at technoevangelist. Shivansh, do you want to say goodbye?
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for to this session. My name is Shivansh Singh. If you want to reach out, you can email me on my email address. It is sshvans@amazon.com. And thank you so much.
And with that, we're going to sign out. Thanks so much. Goodbye.